Hi everyone, how are you today? I'm going to be talking about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë, and I'm going to try to give more brief thoughts this time. There's so much that could be said about this novel, but I want to do just a quick video just to encourage anyone who might have been putting this off or not sure if you want to read it to give it a try. I read the Brontë sisters novels when I was very young. About 22 years ago is when I first read Jane Eyre, and then subsequently some of the other novels. But I never got around to reading this one. This is Anne Bronte's second novel after Agnes Grey, and I think it's both good and bad. It's unfortunate because it's such a good book and has a lot of relevance even for today, but it's good in a way I didn't read it till now because I think being a bit older, there's some aspects of it I can appreciate more than I did when I was young and less experienced in the world. So anyway, a little preamble, but I read this over the holiday season and really found it captivating. I am a slow reader these days, but I finished it in about a week and a half, which is pretty fast for me. And I think what really struck me about this book was how much Anne's voice came out in this. Now, for those of you who have read Agnes Grey, that novel is much shorter. It's more genteel, I guess. It's not so... It doesn't deal with such gritty topics that this novel does. And yet it's a beautiful novel. It's a sweet novel. But what I found in The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was both that same voice and also a grander scale, a much bigger scope for what Anne was trying to convey. Whereas in the previous novel, she had been talking about the trials and joys of life as a governess and falling in love for the first time. This book focuses on an unhappy marriage and every step in the heroine's life that leads her to, through, and out of that marriage. Now, the book has this frame story. It has this narrator, Gilbert Markham, and Gilbert is fascinated with the new widow that moves to town. Her name is Helen Graham, Mrs. Graham, and she is very different from the other townspeople. She keeps to herself in her mansion that she is renting. She's renting a room or two in this mansion. And she has a little son named Arthur who adores Gilbert. And she's very, like I said, she keeps to herself. She's quiet, refined. She's a painter, and doesn't really fit in with Gilbert and his neighbors. So most of the neighbors take offense to that, and they try to tell Mrs. Graham how to raise her son, and basically they get very nosy because they don't have a lot else to entertain them. And Gilbert, on the other hand, while he doesn't initially like Mrs. Graham, he starts to warm up to her and become quite interested in her because she's also very mysterious. She won't disclose her real name or why she's there exactly. It's just known that she's a widow and has to make a life for herself as a painter. So things get really complicated because all the town gossips are trying to unpack this mystery, and Gilbert gets an opportunity to learn the truth. But he must reach this point where he's willing to listen and learn and not be swept up in various rumors and things going around. So that's his personal challenge, but the core of the book, and I really mean the core, it's like the middle third or so, is from Helen's perspective. So if you can make it through the first 100 pages, which are indeed a very slow burn, you'll get to Helen's point of view, and she describes how, as a young and naive woman, she, did not have a very good array of suitors to choose from. And, in conflict with her aunt's wishes, she ends up getting engaged to this Mr. Huntington, who is a rake. I don't think that's a spoiler. I think the back of every copy of this book actually gives much of the plot away already. But, you know, in a nutshell, she marries this rake thinking that she can change him. She has some very interesting religious views that lead her to feel she might be his savior on earth, if you will, leading him to, you know, faith and the real savior of the world. But she feels like maybe she has a part to play here, and that, you know, she wants to feel hope for him, and is convinced that if her influence is in his life, he will reform, and he just needs some good influence. That's basically her take on him. And honestly, Mr. Huntington, it's really interesting how, you know, so many of these dastardly villains of classic literature, they kind of burst in upon the scene in all of their villainy. I'm thinking of Count Fosco from The Woman in White, who actually there's a lot in common with The Woman in White between this book and that, which I'm not going to go into right now, but structurally they're very similar. You know, Count Fosco, you kind of get the ick from him almost right away. Whereas with Mr. Huntington here, there's just this slow unraveling of his character that just gets darker and darker as it goes on. And I thought that was masterful, because isn't that often the case, you know? You don't always get to know the full scope of somebody's character immediately. And, you know, it must have been very difficult to be courting back in the day, because there was so much pressure to make a good match for various economic, social factors, and you might not have a lot of time to decide before you were proposed to / expected to respond. Now Helen, unfortunately, does not heed her aunt's good advice, and yet gives some good reasons for it as well. And I think what I really loved about this novel is its stark realism. It doesn't have a lot of the sensationalism of the other Brontë novels or of the aforementioned Woman in White. It's more naturalistic, realistic, where you're just watching the gradual decline of characters, the gradual evolution of the heroine, and how her flaws and her strengths come to her aid, or sometimes to her detriment throughout the book. I just wanted to, you know, so this is one suitor that that she turns down, and she says to her aunt, "Firstly, he is at least 40 years old, considerably more, I should think, and I am but 18. Secondly, he is narrow-minded and bigoted in the extreme. Thirdly, his tastes and feelings are wholly dissimilar to mine. Fourthly, his looks, voice, and manner are particularly displeasing to me. And finally, I have an aversion to his whole person that I can never surmount." So one of the things I love about Helen is she's just got this sometimes biting sarcasm, but also just the ability to really speak her mind when she feels the need to. But the other thing she kind of learns throughout the book is when to hold her tongue, or when to, you know, remain silent, when that can be a more powerful approach. And I just loved watching her character, because I had a lot of issues with her as a character. I don't think the way her character was portrayed was by any means unrealistic. I think it was very realistic. I think she's just one of those characters that, is so grating sometimes. She's very preachy, and she has such a particular worldview that she is completely dedicated to, and some of it's good, some of it's beautiful, but some of her views end up leading her astray. And it's just amazing to watch, you know, how she stays the same and changes in the book, and that spirit she has all along helps get her through some very, very dark times. I'm not going to go into too much spoiler territory. There are some really dramatic scenes as it reaches the close of her narrative. I think what really made me value The Tenant of Wildfell Hall as well is, like I said earlier, the scope of the novel is not merely, I shouldn't say merely, it's not only concerned with individual characters and their uniqueness slash idiosyncrasies, but it's also really interested in how people influence each other and how actions and behaviors can have these ripple effects throughout your neighborhood, your community, and society. We see this with Mr. Huntington, of course, and his group of friends, and we get to see how their different paths go and the choices they make, how they impact their future and their loved ones. And we see how the vices in society, how they manage to spread through individual interactions. This is especially apparent in the first part of the book, where you've got the townspeople with their garden variety vices of gossip and busybodiness and intrusiveness into the privacy of others. And, you know, it's funny because that part of the book is supposed to be our introduction to this setting. But it really made me think how sometimes those kinds of vices can be just as damaging as the more sordid things that the rest of the book covers. And I just really, again, appreciated how Anne Brontë was looking at all these different layers in society, in people, and how, you know, having to navigate all that is extremely tiring, first of all, and it, again, has far-reaching effects that individual characters may or may not be aware of. And so really enjoyed that. You know, I was looking at Anne Bronte's biography a little bit because I wasn't that aware of her life story. She was born like within a year or so of George Eliot, and it just made me think maybe, you know, if she'd been able to live, I think she died when she was 29, if she'd been able to live to her 60s or so, you know, what kind of masterpiece would she have put out, maybe on the scale of Middlemarch or these other very celebrated novels of Eliot's and contemporaries. That being said, this is quite an excellent book on its own. And, you know, for someone to have written this in their 20s is astounding, honestly. What I will say is it is pretty slow. The beginning and the endings, especially, all the frame story is very slow. So if you're looking for a real page turner, this isn't going to be it, except like in the middle. I did find that section to be really interesting and gripping, but you know, it's a slow burn. It's realistic. It's trying to show the progression of events as clearly as possible. The other thing I think that held this novel back was Anne's, the way she needed to write for a critical and perhaps even male-dominated audience. Many of you may know this, but the Brontes had to publish their first works under masculine names. So Charlotte was Kerber, Anne was Acton, and Emily, I don't remember what Emily's fake name was, but, you know, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall was published as Acton Bell, and even so, a lot of people found the novel too brutal, you know, disturbing. Even Charlotte Brontë wasn't comfortable with it and felt like it was out of character for her sister. But, you know, this was a very brave book to write in its time. That being said, because she had all these hurdles to go through, I did feel like, I felt like the book dragged a bit in places where she was trying so hard to justify her story to the reader and justify every single one of Helen's actions. In fact, you know, the big crisis point in the novel doesn't happen till after Mr. Huntington has done the most abhorrent thing imaginable. So, you know, that's the setting, not just of the book, but of the writer. And it's just a lot of food for thought, really, but I do feel like it holds the book back a little bit and makes it not quite as good as some of the other Brontë novels I've enjoyed in the past. But that being said, don't sleep on The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. It's a great book, definitely worth a try, you know, especially if you know, like other books from this time period and don't mind a slower pace. I was inspired actually to find a copy of Villette. I'm really interested in rereading the Brontes now. It's been so many years. And so I found a copy of Villette that's the same edition I read way back in the day. And I've started going through it. So yeah, I think this will be a year of Brontes for me. Let me know in the comments if you read this or if you like any of the other Bronte novels, and I'll chat with you soon. Bye.